All right, you gatekeepers. So welcome into a nice little mini series we're going to go ahead and do with Into the Light now being live in the game. It's going to be called our Shiny series, as your boy is going to be hunting down, or already has been, grinding away in the Legend Onslaught, trying to hunt down those shinies. Of course, we are attuned to the Edge Transit, but because that's the one that we want the most, it's not the one we're going to get off rip. So in today's video, we're going to talk about the new, the reprise, and the sunrise of the new age Recluse, one of the most infamous weapons of all time, and definitely the most infamous SMG that the game has ever seen. But how does it fare in today's sandbox? Well, if we're being honest, this weapon does now have some competition, and there's definitely some stuff that we have to talk about here. Of course, real quick, I just want to let you guys know that if you want to get your games in DLC for a cheaper price, make sure to have Instant Gaming, top link in the description, along with their free monthly game giveaway. Now, as we all know, the Recluse is an infamous 900 RPM lightweight frame SMG void style. Remind you of anything? Of course, what made the Recluse so dominant back in the gap was the OG version of Master of Arms, as Master of Arms back then would grant you a 50 damage buff upon getting a kill with any weapon in your inventory. Of course, they can't quite bring that same exact version of the perk back into the fold. That would just be really darn busted. That would make it by far and away the best SMG in the game, now wouldn't it? And unfortunately, today's version of Master of Arms only gives you a 15% damage buff, which is the same as Frenzy, but Frenzy will give you max handling and max reload speed along with the 15% damage buff when the perk is proc. So quite the fall from grace, but Master of Arms is kind of just a worse version of Frenzy nowadays, dude. And honestly, if I'm being serious, I think Master of Arms should be bumped up to a minimum of at least 20%, because otherwise it's going to be hard to justify using the perk when you got other options. Speaking of this weapon's other options, let's go ahead and throw up the perk pool, as of course, because the Recluse is part of the Brave arsenal of weapons returning with Into the Light, this thing does have a stacked perk pool. All 12 of the Brave arsenal weapons have a stacked perk pool. So we'll start off in the third column for PvE. I would say you can make an argument for every single perk except for the top two, at least for PvE. I don't think many people are going to be going crazy for dynamic sway or hipfire grip inside of PvE, let's be real. However, Repulsor Brace is definitely going to cook on something like a Void Hunter with Gear Falcons, or really anytime we have something like Volatile Flow in the artifact. Threat Detector, help juice your reload speed when enemies are near you, we'll take that. Subsistence is a classic auto rifle / SMG perk, and lined action can always be pretty useful just because you're going to be boosting the reload speed and the handling just by dealing damage with the weapon. And then maybe Feeding Frenzy is probably the least popular out of these five, but it is part of the classic role that Recluse came with all those years ago, so you know Feeding Frenzy had to be here. All five of these perks are gonna do you pretty good justice. It just depends on what type of flavor you're going for. For example, since I'm using this one primarily on my Void Hunter, I'm rocking with Repulsor in that third column all day, every day. But the other four perks are going to be good universally on any subclass. It really just does come down to your preference. Maybe Subsistence to help you keep shooting the weapon for longer periods of time. And the other three perks are going to give you some reload speed, which is always useful. In a perfect world, this weapon would have rewind rounds in the third column. We would rock with that, but overall you still have a lot of good options in the weapons third column. So now let's go ahead and segue over to the fourth column, as this perk pool is also pretty darn stacked. Okay, now generally when looking at fourth column perks for weapons, you generally want to have some sort of damage perk in there. So right off the rip, bro, we're throwing out Tap the Trigger, although that's more of a PvP perk anyways, and Destabilizing Rounds. I know they love putting the Repulsor Destabilizing Rounds on almost every Void weapon these days. I've never been the biggest fan of it, so I'm not going to be mentioning Destabilizing Rounds or Tap the Trigger in this weapon's fourth column, just so you guys know. Let us continue. Of course, we've already briefly mentioned Master of Arms and how I feel it's a worse version of Frenzy nowadays because it's only giving you a 15% damage bump. It's not the worst, but it's just such a far cry from what it once was. I don't really think many people are going to be rocking with Target Lock in PvE on this SMG. I kind of see the vision with Drunk Goggles on, but I can't really give you the true hard recommendation of Target Lock, although it ain't the worst option. Of course, Frenzy, one of my favorite perks in the entire game. I just love this perk. It procs when you're not even really doing anything, and you get a lot of bang for your buck with the perk. 15% damage, 100 handling, and 100 reload speed. One of the best perks in this column. We're going to skip destabilizing rounds like I said earlier. This weapon also does have surrounded. In something like onslaught, surrounded will be very, very useful. Giving yourself that 40% damage buff with this perk can help you tremendously, and it can definitely allow you to put in some decent work and shred some of those weaker enemies, especially if you can combine it with some sort of reload perk in the first column. And as we know, there's quite a good few perks in that third column to pair with surrounded, just saying. Then we have the new perk of desperate measures. Weapon final blows grant bonus damage. Melee and grenade final blows grant a larger damage bonus that can stack. This perk can be pretty nutty, especially if you are able to check out some grenades or melee abilities. You'll get some value out of desperate measures. It's a pretty good perk, and it's a new perk, definitely worth checking out. And then we cannot forget about the brave arsenal of weapons and their origin trait and dominability. Final blows grant grenade energy when playing a light subclass, or melee energy when playing a dark subclass. It's 5% to either or depending on what type of subclass you're on, which means that the Recluse intrinsically at base has a pseudo form of demolitionist on here, which is pretty darn awesome. We'll happily take that. Now we gotta ask ourselves the question, what are some good roles to go for on the new age Recluse? Well, if you're going for the shiny version of the Recluse, which I assume most people are going for just all the shiny weapons that they can get, you will be able to roll 4 perks, 2 in each column. Now here is the one that I got to drop for me yesterday. I would honestly say this is my first valuable shiny that I kept that I'm going to use. As you can see, it rolled with Repulsor in the third column, one of the main perks I was going for. And then I have the option between Frenzy or Desperate Measures in the fourth column. Just kind of depends on what type of content I'm doing. But having the ability to have 4 perks, multiple combinations on the same weapon is going to be very good. So, decent options in the third column. If you do plan on using this SMG in a Void build, definitely try and get Repulsor Brace as one of your options. But if you're not, I would go for Subsistence, Inlined Action, or maybe Threat Detector. You could even convince me on Feeding Frenzy, but really any of the top 4 perks will do for any subclass. And then in the fourth column, dude, you just got so many options. Me personally, like I said earlier, huge fan of Frenzy, so I'm super excited that I got this one to drop with both Repulsor Brace and Frenzy. Really love this combination. But something like Surrounded with Inlined Action, Feeding Frenzy, or Threat Detector could be pretty darn good. Desperate Measures can also be a pretty fun perk. And then at that point, I would say Master of Arms would be good after all the other ones. It just does kind of stink that Master of Arms isn't nearly as good of a perk that it once used to be. Hopefully they do buff it at some point in the future. Now, when I said that this weapon does have competition nowadays, I was of course referring to the Funnel Web. As we know, the Funnel Web was remodeled after the Recluse and released to us during the Witch Queen. They look just alike. They're both 900 RPM Void SMGs, and they can both roll with Subsistence and Frenzy. So my main thing that I would say to you is try and get something that the Funnel Web can't. Now, the origin trait is pretty nice. If you just wanted to outright replace your Subsistence Frenzy Funnel Web with a Subsistence Frenzy Recluse just for the origin trait, I understand. I can see the vision on that. But I would still try and get a role that the Recluse can get that the Funnel Web can't. That way they actually serve different purposes in your vault. And then the last thing that I want to say is that I do really want to see SMGs just get some sort of a damage buff inside of PvE. Ever since hand cannons got their buffs, they are just by far and away the best primary weapon to use inside of PvE, and you can really feel the SMGs fall off, especially in harder end content. Just do a normal onslaught. You can feel the difference between when you start and at the very end. And if you're bringing it into a legend onslaught, you will be bringing in a BB gun. But that goes for SMGs as a whole. I would like to see them get a damage buff. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on the new age Reprised, back in action, Recluse, your favorite roles for it, and if you have gotten any good shiny weapons yet. Thank you so much for watching the video. Remember, check out Instant Gaming if you want to get your games in DLC for a cheaper price. You guys be safe, take care, consider subscribing. Trying to hit that 30K. We'll see your faces in the next one. Adios.